And we are recording once again with Dr. Eben Alexander and his partner, Miss Karen Newell. You guys have been on my podcast several times before, and I always love it. It's always, as I always tell you guys, it's like sitting around a campfire. The warmth that comes off you guys is palpable. And instead of the interviews I normally do with ex-special forces assassins and nuclear weapons experts, sometimes it's good to back away from the insanity of this realm and instead
Love in this world.
retreat into the heart a little bit. It's all fun and interesting, but sometimes it's like, okay, let's stop with the invasions and the pandemics and let's where's the love? But where are my manners? Miss Newell, please introduce yourself. And then Dr. Eben Alexander, because I need to
Well,
start using manners.
hi everyone. I'm Karen Newell, and I'm co-founder of Sacred Acoustics and co-author with Eben of his third book, Living in a Mindful Universe.
Just incredible. And everybody listening, because I have no manners now, I'm interrupting immediately. Those books will be in the description. They're fantastic. I actually personally like Living in a Mindful Universe more than Proof of Heaven. That one resonates with me even more, and we can get into that later. Dr. Eben Alexander, for all the new listeners.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And to me, I many times in talks I will say that the book Proof of Heaven is like a question mark, but the
Yes.
real proof of heaven is in Living in a Mindful Universe. That's where the science and the spirituality come together. So I'm glad to hear your uh, uh, statement that you really love Living in a Mindful Universe, because from my point of view, and I think Karen would agree, that is really the main book taking this world forward,
And
beyond the
honestly,
proof of heaven.
honestly, this idea of proof of heaven has always kind of bothered me because heaven is pretty much a Christian term. And so
Sure.
we've come in the US Western world to kind of think of it as a generic term for the afterlife, but it's not. And so I think it's important to point out that the heaven we speak of is for everyone, all souls on earth, regardless of belief system.
Sure. And absolutely, and well said. The So for everyone listening, and the podcast, I can happily say has been growing by leaps and bounds. So whereas I normally would just say kind of instinctually, I'd be like, for all the new listeners, and there wouldn't really be any new listeners, but now there are new listeners. Um, for Proof of Heaven, if you haven't read it, it's a very popular book. It's Dr. Eben Alexander's experience with a going into a coma for several days, and really with no reasoning, no medical reasoning, you should have in no way survived, and yet your experiences and recollections from there are more real than anything you've ever experienced here. I haven't had that through meditation. I've told you before in past episodes, I've had experiences that make this living life seem like a foggy dream. But to me, Proof of Heaven is sort of like sort of like a first date. It's flirty. There's the sexual attention. It's all new. And then Living in a Mindful Universe is like a more ossified, appreciative relationship like 40 years later. And it's that sort of, it's not there's not the spiky, but it's a very calm kind of concrete foundation to something. And
You go ahead, sorry.
no, you can go.
Well, what I was going to say is you kind of described Eben's personal journey because when I first met him, and I think when he first came out of his coma, and when I first met him, he was just getting Proof of Heaven to a publisher. He was just this kind of raw energy,
Yeah.
just so excited, and he would talk about this spirituality with this kind of new freshness, as if all of us are just hearing about this for the first time, and it was sort of this naive innocence. I think in the yeah, and so it's kind of like the first card of the tarot deck, the Fool. But the
Yeah.
Fool is not to mean that someone is not smart. What it means is that their mind is completely open and they are open to everything. And then over time, Eben kind of started to ground some of these concepts into his being, and he has become calmer, and he's become, I think, even more articulate at explaining how the science really supports all of this. And that's where Living in a Mindful Universe, that's what's reflected there, I
Right.
think.
Yeah.
So it's funny how you describe the books the same way I might describe Eben himself.
But I think it's very accurate though. I mean, I look at like when I first decided not to go to medical school, like early 2014, and then like lost her brother to suicide, took psychedelics. There was this whole, you couldn't have a normal conversation with me. 5 minutes in, I'd be like, oh, we're all just love and we're opening up. And
Yeah,
although
yeah.
I still 100% stand by all those statements, it's more measured now. It can flow out in a conversation where I am talking to someone and it doesn't pop up in the first 3 seconds. It might be 2 hours later, or it might be 2 episodes later where it doesn't mean I believe it any less. But yeah, it's kind of more on calm ground. It's like your 100th presentation versus your first. You're just a lot more measured, and there's a confidence that you can't fake. So
Well,
with
I would just volunteer that a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've worked with not only experiencers, but with other scientists studying consciousness around the world. So I've gained more and more
yeah,
kind of confidence and validation of the worldview that I'm coming to on this. And I think that is the part that's important for this world to understand that, I'm not just this lone voice in the wilderness. There are hundreds of scientists
Maybe
participating,
thousands.
maybe thousands participating in this kind of expansion of our cultural knowledge about ourselves and our relationship with the universe and the nature of reality. And I think part of that assimilation and integration is reflected with maybe a bit more of a calm and easygoing approach about it. So
it,
that may
it
be part of what you're saying.
it's like it's like when there are different scientific discoveries that happen on different, not now because there's instantaneous communication, but like 2000 years ago, when they would discover the same sort of physical properties, what about the flow of water, or air pressure, or chemistry. And when they discover it in different areas, it gives it a little more validation. You're like, oh, the pyramids in South America and in China and in Egypt, you're like, noted, pyramids, okay. So
Yeah.
that's on that note. I interviewed Dr. Dale Graff, who is the head of the CIA
Remote
Star
viewing.
yeah, Stargate project,
Hmm.
and read his book about it. And I mean, again, so it's one thing if I'm sitting here telling you about psychedelics, or it's Dr. Alexander waking up from his coma and telling you everything. When you talk to a guy who was the head of a CIA project during the Cold War, there's no room for flowery. I mean, it truly is the men in black, like, national security is at stake. And I interviewed him, and I've also interviewed a Delta Force operator who's very familiar with it. Again, a guy that's never smoked pot in his life, looks like a GI Joe, but he'll sit here and tell you, just as plain as he would tell you how to sight a gun and take out a target. He'll tell you, like, oh yeah, you have to focus the mind and intuition, and you can manifest what you would like. And it's just like, Timothy Leary's supposed to say that, not you. Like, this is he'll look at you and just very straight face. I mean, he'll tell you how to build an explosive, and then he'll tell you that everything's energy. And you're like, what's going on? But that's, to me, is like the multiple discoveries around the world. I'm rambling, but what I was getting to was, whereas that's proof of having living in a mindful universe is more solidified. And my favorite part about it is the idea that not only are we here to learn lessons, much like college courses, but that we planned these lessons either entirely or to an extent or to a little bit, different degrees. And that this isn't, not only does everything happen for a reason, you put yourself in this spot. You, like a training scenario, like a Delta Force guy, they would put you in a training scenario, go, okay, you can't use your right hand. Let's pretend your right hand's been shot. Like, and I always think about losing a brother to suicide. And I thought about that before I ever read any of your books, was like, was this an accident? Or like, did I come into the, and I had this like image in my head of like me and my three brothers, like before we come into this realm. And it's like almost like a football play, like huddled up. And it's like, all right, when you guys are younger, like, I'm going to take my life and you guys are going to grow in this way, and it's going to cause this. And then we're going to meet hereafter, like 1, 2, 3, break. And like, that gave me so much peace. So
Well, you bring up a beautiful point because it really is about relationships, loved ones. I mean, these are where the deep lessons come from. And ultimately, as any NDEer will tell you, based on that ambience, that environment that you encounter, and that infinitely loving force of light on the other side, this is truly all about love. So that's ultimately the arbiter of all of our human interactions, and it's all about lessons. You're right in your story of how you and your brothers kind of planned this, and that includes a tragic loss. And people from the ego perspective have great difficulty accepting that. They think, wait a minute, I would never really volunteer to come into a situation where my brother is going to commit suicide. And yet, at the deeper, higher soul level, in terms of lessons learned and taught and growth and transformation, you have made a beautiful observation about your own hardship. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And as I told you guys before, I have a phone call to make at 10:30. I'm gonna turn my phone off. I think I'm just gonna do the full hour with you guys. I don't want to do that. I'm gonna talk to you guys. I'm having more fun doing this. But so with that, when that thought first broached my mind, I was very hesitant. And everybody listening can tell whenever I have on guests that I really love, I fanboy and I start to talk a lot. So I'm gonna try to slow it down a little bit. That idea, like you said, if you bring that up to someone else, and understandably so, the ego would, how dare you? You're making light of my tragedy. Why would I ever do that? And you can't. It's a realization you have to have on your own. With that, and now that I've accepted that with my brother, like an exercise, now is the time to up the weight. Now let's get back to where there's pain, there's growth. For all future listeners, today's Thursday, March 10th, 2022. How could we as a world try to look at what's going on right now with just the horrific events in Ukraine, the anti-war protesters being arrested in Russia? I mean, the women and children being shelled in Ukraine. How do we make sense of this? What let and right, it comes up and it kind of makes you uncomfortable. You're like, I don't know if this was planned. This is pretty bad. But to me, it's like, well, no, we got to move towards that hesitance. What lessons of humanity did we plan for this? Where can love shine through?
I think, in my mind, it brings up an issue we often discuss, and that is in addiction and alcoholism, what you find is what's called the gift of desperation. And that is that someone hits a bottom that is so rough that it energizes, they're kind of bouncing off the bottom and rising back up. And we all know that addiction, alcoholism is very dangerous and can be very fatal. With I think a record annual loss to opioid crisis as of May of 2021, with 100,000 Americans dying of opiate and other drug overdoses. And the reason I bring that up is because I believe this notion of a collective gift of desperation is what's going on with these hardships. We look at this war in Ukraine, it's horrible, and it's because Putin can lie to his people. It's the only way he can even get away with it. That obviously won't last forever. And the rest of the world is suffering because of a lot of this. But I would say that that always offers opportunities. I mean, we see the tremendous humanitarian shows of love and compassion of the neighboring countries, of Poland, of Romania, Moldova, and other countries that are accepting these refugees, and an outpouring of condemnation from most of the civilized world for Putin's war crimes. And I believe, as tough and horrible as the situation is, that there are tremendous opportunities for growth and learning. I think, for one thing, what this world is learning is, as soon as we get out of this acute conflict of Putin massacring innocent Ukrainians, is we all need to have a very serious discussion about getting nuclear weapons off this planet.
Yeah.
They were a giant mistake. I mean, they served a purpose in World War II. They probably saved a few million lives at the end of that conflict by ending the war much more quickly. But they're not serving any useful purpose now. And it's high time that all civilized countries absolutely insisted on denuclearization. I know there was some progress on that front under the Obama administration, And once we get through this mad period with Putin, and once the Russians figure out just how badly he's lied to them and damaged their country through his lies, through this kind of egotistical, narcissistic rage, anyway, I think that there are some beautiful lessons that we can learn that will improve our world and make it a safer place. But of course, we have to get through this imminent tragedy that's unfolding right now.
And let me just point out, it comes off when if you're someone who's watching the news and seeing all this tragedy, this kind of explanation can come off a little empty. Oh, we planned this so that we could learn these lessons.
Yeah,
is very, very challenging.
A hard sell.
Yeah, and so but we need to compare it to, say, our personal struggles. When we're in the middle of a personal struggle, when we're right in the middle of it, when we're right in the middle of going through it, is not the time to start to analyze it from that larger perspective, right? It's after we get through it. And so hearing this now from this larger perspective, that perspective won't come until we're actually through it. So it can be very challenging to hear. And very often people have asked us, what can we do now? How can we help now? We're so far away. And of course, we say you can do the obvious: donate money to reputable, please check them out, reputable organizations. You can volunteer in your local community for different efforts that are going on. But you can also hold your spiritual energy in a different way. So many of us, when these things happen in the world and we hear about nuclear bombs, we immediately go into a fear response. And if we can find a way to instead find a compassion response, this will, we're of the understanding, and living in a mindful universe spells out this concept that we're all part of one mind. All of humanity is part of this one mind, or I would even say one heart. And that heart is connected, and so we can feel the pain of others, but we don't want to fall into that pain and feel fear. We're sitting in, a beautiful countryside of Virginia that isn't getting bombed, that isn't, we're not being threatened. So to be fearful ourselves is not quite the right response. But if we can find that feeling of compassion, and the reason that compassion can really help is once we start to feel this sort of gratitude or compassion or any kind of loving feelings in the heart. Heart math research tells us that that energy is spreading out to the world around us. Your Delta Force remote viewers understand that energy is going out there. And, some of those guys have developed the ability to talk about love in a pretty meaningful fashion. But it's interesting to see that dichotomy. At any rate, feeling these feelings of love, knowing that they're emanating to the world. The Ukrainians in particular are an especially compassionate society. I see them talk, and they're very grounded, they're very certain, they're very inspiring, they're very peaceful, they're kind, they're loving, and they have the capacity to receive this love. Not everyone does. If you're a starving child in Africa, the first thing you can think about is getting some food, not necessarily receiving love. But we've seen the Ukrainians have that capacity. And so any of us who have the capacity ourselves to emanate that love to the universe know that it can be received by them. And anyone who's a refugee in a bad situation anywhere who can't generate those kind of feelings, know that it's your opportunity to receive the love that humans from all over the planet are feeling and sending towards you.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to remember. I mean, Karen mentioned, some of the obvious steps we can take, like donating to the right charity, calling our Congress people to support certain initiatives and all that. But never forget the power of prayer. Prayer has tremendous ability to help in healing. We certainly see this in individuals and praying for others. I mean, often it can have a very beneficial result. And don't forget that praying for all souls involved in this conflict, praying for the Ukrainians and all of the beautiful people helping them. And I would add to that, praying for the Russian soldiers who have been lied to,
absolutely,
sent into this debacle of Putin, his craziness. And so we really need to pray for all souls involved and bring love into this equation through our heart, through our prayers, in our thinking. And I think that helps us to be more resilient to some of the damage that can often lead people into fear and anxiety.
And it's not to say, I don't want to come off as some kind of, new age, oh, love is all there is, when in fact that is the truth. Love needs to be a factor. But when you feel that,
don't worry. We lost 90% of the people in the first 10 seconds, and I don't care. It's fine.
and
Let them go. Let them go. Doesn't matter.
if you're feeling anger and frustration, which of course is very challenging to not feel when you see some of these images, you take that anger and frustration into your action, but you do it from a loving place because you want to help. And we've seen examples of this all over. I mean, the Jewish people especially are so good at this because they've had so much tragedy. We were just watching a rabbi who has gathered the network of all of these charitable organizations together to assist. And, we can help by donating money or helping their cause in some fashion. Not all of us have money to donate, but there's always a way to help.
It makes me think of I think we've talked about this quote before, Baba Ram Dass talking about how, once you've overcome something that's difficult to love, you then move on to the next most difficult thing. And so he would have pictures every morning of people he loved, and it would be like Buddha, Mother Mary. It would be a picture of his own mother. It'd be I can never remember his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, his guru. And then there'd be friends that maybe he had falling out with, and he would look at them and be like, I love you. And then as that one got better, he would go to the next harder grudge, and all the way down the line. He said the one he could always had problems with was Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger under Ronald Reagan. And he would always, I've said it a million, excuse me.
I said he hit a wall on that one.
I know, and I just always love hearing Ram Dass in his beautiful voice, and he'd reenact what he does every morning. He'd be like, "Good morning, Buddha." He'd be like, "Good morning, Mother." "Good morning, Neem Karoli Baba. Hello, Casper." And he would just, but he said
There's always someone, right?
But,
there's always someone that's going to hit our triggers.
Well,
and those are the curious ones. Those are the ones that kind of trigger feelings inside of us, as you just described. Those are the ones we want to pay attention to, because it's not the person themselves. It's what are they triggering inside of us? And what is that feeling that is preventing us from finding that love? And so that's a process that really everyone can go through. I love that.
I would say one of the main kind of discoveries of my near-death experience was to realize that some of the people who before my coma I might see as my nemesis or my enemy, someone who's preventing me from getting something that I thought I needed and wanted in life. But after my coma, I came to realize that often the most dire-looking ones were kind of the nearest and dearest soulmate, and that we were in fact trying to teach each other, especially challenging lessons. So I really opened my mind much more to accepting that kind of conflict with others as part of the transformation, part of the energy that helps us to grow into a much more mature soul.
I think you have to move towards that pain. It's like the quotes about like free speech. Like, free speech isn't that what you agree with, it's that which boils your blood. And that whole story about like Caspar Weinberger, I find myself going like, yes, pray for the Ukrainian people. And then you're like, pray for the Ukrainian soldiers. And then you're like, pray for the Russian soldiers. Like they're in there and they're protecting their homeland. And that's what they genuinely believe. And I find myself like, where does it start to get uncomfortable? And I have to pause, and I'm like, you have to pray for Putin. And I say that, and you feel it, and you're like, no, you're like, excuse my French, fuck that guy. But that's the line. That's the growth. If it feels easy, there's no growth there. When I'm working out, if I'm not sweating, that's not a workout. You got to pick up the dumbbells you don't want to pick up.
But you can feel, I have developed a capacity to feel compassion for Putin, because what about him? What
drove that?
What part of humanity is missing in him that can cause him to make these kind of decisions? And it really makes me want to figure out and help him through what is that baby wound that he had that has put him in this kind of situation. And if he could heal, if Putin himself could heal, that would solve everything from the top down. And I don't know if that's possible, and it sounds very blithe and kind of foolish, as I might say, right? To think that that's possible. But love is all there is. And we have to do both, right? We have to do the physical world actions, but to continue to ignore the spiritual realm and the spiritual approach, to just completely ignore it as it won't make any difference, that's our peril. And I think that's the one opportunity, simply due to the spirit of these Ukrainian people. One of it is their ability to actually communicate with the Western world, because many who have been put into this situation, their cities being pummeled by Putin and others, we haven't had, reporters embedded with the victims of the war explaining to us what's going on in real time. That's new. What's also new is the level of condemnation that's come around the world in a very unified fashion. And I would say our world has been very fractured. And somehow it's this hardship that's bringing us back together. And when I say us, of course, we have to acknowledge it's the Western world. Yeah. And that's what's coming together. We haven't quite seen it from all parties in the world yet. But the Western world was very fractured. And I would say that has a lot to do with the propaganda and Russian efforts over many decades to create that fracture. Sure. And it was happening in Europe, in the US. And now suddenly, because of him as well, we're all unified. And so that feels good. It feels good to see Congress in the US coming together over some issues. It feels good to think that some of my fellow Americans are on the same page on a given issue. And so I think that that's another gift that comes, is this unification. And if we can stay unified, and if we can stay, unified towards the, I'll say, reduction of authoritarianism in the world, even totalitarianism is what's going on now. It's gotten even worse. But if we can stay unified, and it's Eben has said, it's we can really look at it as, democracy versus authoritarianism, the people versus the authoritarians. And so this is our opportunity. Now that the world is becoming more unified, we've been tending towards that. And now that the West has become more unified, we can start to have that influence once again, because of course we know that the people around the world love the idea of democracy, whether they live in a democracy or not. It's a very appealing, attractive kind of belief system.
And I would say the other interesting observation is how, when you look at, from our perspective, how so much of what Putin is doing is so evil. It's kind of a good lesson, though, in how the universe tends to then give you the lesson you need. And the lesson Putin's getting out of this is the exact opposite of what he was trying to do. He's trying to expand Russian hegemony and control over the world.
And destroy NATO.
And destroy NATO and destroy Ukraine. And what he's actually doing, he's brought the U.S. political division together. We're united. And not only that, he's really united the U.S. With NATO in many ways. And Europe and American cooperation to stand against Putin is really going to be the ultimate result of Putin's actions. So it's a beautiful instruction in how the universe often, it may not give us what we ask for, but it certainly gives us what we really need to grow.
And Ukrainians themselves have said that they've become more unified, probably more than anyone else, that they had their own fractures going on, and not anymore. They are all unified. And so if that's what we were looking for, we've got it. I was really wanting unity. I was not happy with the fractures. And here we have it, and we have it because of a hardship. So it's very, humanity is very interesting, how we choose to grow. And we have to look at it that way. We're all a part of this, but it's not necessarily conscious. It's not coming from that ego mind, as Eben says, like we make our intention for how our day is going to roll out. That's not, it comes from a deeper place, a place inside each of us that's connected to this greater whole that has a different perspective on what's going on. And part of that perspective, of course, is that when we die, our consciousness doesn't end. And so all of those soldiers who are dying, we often hear about from mediums and others who study these phenomena that, where war took place, there may often be a lot of souls that are still struggling with that. And that may be taking place in Russia right now. And those souls need our help. Those souls that have escaped from the physical body also need our help in realizing that they can now move on. But that's a whole other angle. But what I'm very comforted by is that the civilians, the children who are being bombed, their awareness hasn't flashed out. They've continued on to another realm, and they're going through healing processes, and that's what comforts me. And that they will have another opportunity if they desire to come back and be in a body, and hopefully come back with lessons of hardship in war that they then bring forward to prevent such things from happening again. You often hear Europeans talking about how they never imagined, tanks rolling across their land like they did in World War II. We haven't had that here.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had such things, but those memories just came back, and they're thinking, how could this be happening again? Well, now we have a whole other generation of people who hopefully are going to be saying that same thing, never again, and making all the moves that we had been making to prevent that from happening.
I would say the only other thing I'd like to mention at this point is as part of the science of consciousness and knowing of near-death experiences is kind of the tip of the spear in our modern emergence of understanding of the nature of reality. It's important to point out life reviews have been described for thousands of years across all belief systems. So ultimately, no matter what and how Putin is dealt with in this material world, he's going to have a life review where all of this is something he'll have to live through from the perspective of those who are affected by his actions.
People often ask us about Hitler. What happens to Hitler when he dies? Does he go to heaven or hell? And Eben will talk about, well, he must be having this horrific life review that's still going on, because you have to feel the pain that you've put onto others from their perspective. And that was 6 million Jews and countless other victims.
50 plus million victims of World War II. So,
yeah, and so that's now we have a new person to focus on that's more palpable. That's more, we've seen it firsthand. Hitler is some kind of historical figure that none of us alive really had. Well, some of us alive had to deal with him, but not all. I did not, and so now I do. I have a reference point that I'll never forget.
Yeah, and it's it's moving what you said earlier about like hard to love. I think of someone like Hitler. On one hand, it's like you read about accounts of like how his dad would beat him and his dog when he was a kid, and he would wake up like a day later, and he and the dog would be laying there in like a pile of or a puddle of urine, and he never knew if it was himself or his dog, because his father would beat them to the point where I don't think even out of fear, it was just the body unconsciously just released urine. And I think about that and you go, all right, well, that's not the loving home I was raised in. And then you go and read about the Einsatzgruppen in Auschwitz and you go, yeah, that doesn't really balance out. But the point is so how do you love that person? I think, again, it was Ram Dass saying that although in an ideal world, like his love of Caspar Weinberger would eventually change him, and although it didn't, and I don't think Ram Dass was naive about that, I do believe it was Ram Dass that said it's more about your own personal. It's like when people say forgiveness isn't for the person being forgiven, it's for the person that's doing the forgiveness. They're showing themselves that they are letting go of hatred. When I think of how do I love Hitler, and that's going to be taken out of context in 5 years, but how do I love Hitler? How do I love Putin? How do I love Stalin? How do I love the masterminds of 9/11 or the ISIS members who decapitate handcuffed people? I don't really have. I would like to, but I don't believe it's going to change them. For me, it's, am I capable of that in my heart? And again, for anybody in Ukraine, just if the day after my brother died, if Dr. Alexander came up and said, Tommy, you actually planned this, I would have punched you in the face.
Exactly.
Of course.
I'm very aware that everything we're saying right now it's not something I'm going to insert in other people's lives. Again, you guys are in Virginia. I'm in Maryland in a leather chair. We're not in Kyiv. I get it.
You said something interesting, though. You said that, when you develop that love for Stalin, for Putin, for Hitler, that you're really not going to change them. The
Yeah.
point is not to change them.
No.
The point, just like forgiveness, is to change yourself
Yes.
and have that capacity. And so, what I do is I imagine a world where everyone has that capacity. If each of us has that capacity, we don't need to worry about
Exactly.
anyone else, right? We all have that from within. And I believe that's our birthright. When children are born, they're happy. Little
Yeah.
babies are happy and smiling, and it's the experiences they go through that starts to shape, how they respond later in life. But children are basically born happy. So
Yeah.
they were showing on the news that we've been watching a woman in Kiev in a shelter, and she's got 3 young children. She has no plans to leave, and one of them is a baby about 6 months old or so. This baby, she says, people ask her, how can you keep a baby in that setting? And she's like, well, the baby doesn't know what's going on. And the baby actually plays a very important role, because the baby is so happy and smiley that she cheers everyone up. And so that, I imagine a world where everyone is like that, and you don't have anyone who's spewing out the other kind of energy. So wishful thinking, I don't know, but one person at a time, we can do this. And thanks to people like you, Tommy, as well, for talking about these kinds of things, even though you're also talking about Delta Force and Army stuff. And I love that you're bringing that thread into your podcast, because we all can do this, and it doesn't matter if you're a warrior or a mother. We all have this capacity.
Well, remember, warriors can be professing that love of humanity. And that's often, as an American, I like to believe that is what our military is like. I know there are many exceptions, but by and large, I would say that a tremendous number of people around the world have been very,
Blessed
with the arrival of troops to help protect them against brutal dictators and things like that.
You're seeing it in the Ukrainian army. Someone was commenting that we either see pictures of them, firing missiles, or they're carrying children over, evacuation
and helping
routes.
elderly people over burned out bridges and all that stuff.
Someone was commenting between the difference between the Russian approach, their military approach, which is basically destruction, and the other military approach, which is defense and helping out the people who are suffering. And so that the Ukrainians really have, the commenter was stating, turned themselves into a very Western type of armed forces, where they do both. And it's very inspiring, I have to say. They're turning into NATO forces themselves. They're behaving that same way. So
it does, again, with the kind of talking about Dr. Alexander's proof of heaven, and then versus talking to like Dr. Dale Graff or the Delta Force guy, who ironically enough is Dr. Dale Comstock. But like, and you go, oh, this is on a kind of, again, the pyramids on the other side of the world. What Karen brought up earlier, and what Dr. Alexander brought up, which I believe is a reference to proof of heaven, where a little bit of evil does exist in the universe because it provides learning points from it. You can't have nothing. You can't enjoy a hot shower unless you know what it's like when the hot water runs out, right? You have to have that polarity.
Right.
It makes me think of that sort of evil point of, so just the other day, 2 days ago, yesterday, I don't remember, they run together. I had on a former CIA officer, 20-year intelligence analyst, Claire Lopez. I have her on every week. And who, the farthest person from the discussion we have right now, if I said this stuff to her, she'd look at me like I had 2 heads.
yeah.
But she said the same point, though. She said, just from her mind, she goes, oh, like a weakening and slowly falling apart NATO force is now tightening up, buckling together, realizing that people like us, the world isn't all milk and honey and roses and rainbows. But so again, there is sort of that beautiful, there is purpose to it. And again, we say all of this, I'm in an air-conditioned apartment with a refrigerator full of food, and I have a blanket on, and I'm sitting in front of an iMac, and I'm my own boss. Like, I'm blessed beyond description. Rightfully so. Anyone even remotely near Ukraine would probably want to shoot me if they heard me talking about it in the detached manner I am, in the same way that I couldn't possibly have this conversation coming up this April 8 years ago about my brother. Nonetheless, it doesn't make it any less right. It's the Dr. Alexander, I imagine you would have experience with it. It's like the chief of medicine at a hospital being like, okay, like I know we just treated all these burn victims from a school bus that caught on fire. Now we got to talk about the medical billing. And everyone looks at them like they're Satan, but that's also the world we live in, and that is a factor. So all of this is, and Miss Newell, as you said earlier, people are gonna write us off as, trust me, it's done. It's people, what you like about my ability to have different people on. I love having on people from just all walks of things. Most people don't like the people on one side. I can't. Why are you bringing on military guys? And the military guys are like, "Are you stupid, or do you just not?" I get it. I already know the comments are going to be hateful. That's fine. I don't think it makes the discussion any less pertinent. If we can talk about Hitler now, 77 years removed, it doesn't mean that the same conversation couldn't be had 77 years from now about what's going on. So if it's valid in 77 years, then it's valid now. So I think we can and should talk about it. But yeah, it's hard to you want to feel nothing but love, and at the same time we have this beautiful conversation, and then you go and look at like a video. We could end this podcast, and I could, the next most trending video on Twitter could be I saw a video 2 days ago. It was like just like a traffic camera, and it just shows like two kids walking, and then a shell explodes like 20 feet away. And the next image are these kids, probably no older than 6, with no arms.
Yeah.
And you look at it,
Oh.
and it just, like a bucket of cold water. You're like, there's blood, there's muscle, there's tissue. It just smacks you in the face. And then you look back and go, okay, now we got to try to love Putin. And you're like, what the hell did you just say?
Yeah.
I'm talking myself in circles now. I don't really
The
know.
thing
So
is, I think an important thing is to meet people where they are, right? And so we don't say you got to love Putin. That's like the furthest, final step, right?
Yeah.
You start way back. Let's just start with compassion for the Ukrainian people and what they're going through, and then move from there, right? And so,
and as much as I'm a fan of prayer and love and all that, the bottom line is you've got to also live that truth in this world. We grow as souls through our actions in this world.
And Eben expresses plenty of anger and frustration over this. It's not,
right.
We don't sit around and just do love. We do both.
We do both, but also we have to live effectively to try and bring that love into reality. And that means sending Stinger missiles and javelins to the Ukrainians. That's a huge part of this love, to defend innocent people against a brutal military onslaught. And there's just no getting around that. You've made beautiful points about the power of things like gratitude and forgiveness. I think those are two of the most underutilized powers we have as human beings to make our lives much better. But it also involves taking action for justice, for the right things to transpire. And we can never lose sight of that. As much as I might hold all those beautiful Ukrainian people and other Europeans in my heart with great love, I have to remember also that the Russian soldiers have been lied to and sent on this mission by a madman. So it really, we have to be practical about it, but also try and maintain a spiritual balance. And kind of the power of that love is to ultimately heal all of us. So it's something that we need to invoke and also remember the notion of forgiveness. I've seen several of the Ukrainians interviewed on TV in the last few days say they could never forgive Putin. But
that's now.
And that's now. And also remember that, as you pointed out, the greatest benefactor of forgiveness is the forgiver. And that it liberates them from the shackles of holding themselves.
Except their homes have just been destroyed by bombs, and their father may be dead, and so you got to meet them where they are.
I
And right
agree.
now they need
I
compassion.
agree. They need compassion,
Yeah.
and they need military aid and humanitarian aid and
Yeah.
food, and they need.
And they
From
need
my
our help.
point of view, a no-fly zone is a reasonable
Yeah.
way to go. I mean,
And-
some way we need to protect them from death from above.
And and you said it earlier with atomic weapons. Yeah, I mean, you look at someone like Desmond Doss, right? The guy that wouldn't carry a gun, and
Right.
it's a beautiful story, and it starts out and they all hate him and they're like, we're gonna kill you on the field, and then it ends with like, he's got his own
Saved so many lives.
He
yeah.
saved 75 lives
So
in
many
one
lives.
night.
Yeah.
Just physically. That
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
count
Physically.
his prayers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, not only that, and the other soldiers would like walk around. And if any other soldier was like, that guy's a pacifist, you'd have 100 just grizzled Marines who were not like that, standing around him and being like, over our dead bodies. So I look at someone like Doss is able to exist because there are men who do the dirty work. And with the atomic bomb, I mean, how do you justify 150,000 men, women, and children being vaporized? I can tell you how. Not just the whole, well, it saved this many. My dad's dad was 18 and was going to be part of the mainland invasion. That's cannon fodder. That was going to make D-Day look like a picnic.
Yeah.
I rationally cannot defend not dropping the bomb because I wouldn't be here to make any argument otherwise. So you see that on one hand, and as you said, Dr. Alexander, I mean, some people might find this funny as we're sitting here in 1 minute saying we got to love them, and on the other hand, it's like, yeah, man, you just got to send the nukes. There's a very, again, to quote Ram Dass, he was like, you may be a child of light with love in your eyes. That doesn't mean you shouldn't know your zip code and where the tax office is. Like,
Exactly.
head in the clouds, feet on the ground.
I've also been inspired, not just by the Ukrainian people, but by the foreigners who are going there to help with the fight. That includes
Sure.
Americans, Europeans, many others, Koreans who have just decided democracy is too important and they're fighting for a cause. And so many of them are expressing that they haven't had the opportunity to fight for a cause like this. And, these young guys never had World War II kind of situations. So they're thrilled to be able to use their skills. And I have such gratitude for those who have those skills, who take them and use them where they can be where they are most needed. I certainly don't have those skills. I would never pretend to be any kind of warrior. I would certainly help if I was there in any way I could, but the way many others are assisting. But to lift up a gun for me is not my thing. And so I'm very grateful for those who do have those skills. And, we have our skills. We all contribute in our own way. And again, I'm so grateful for those soldiers. Even though I'm so anti-violence, anti-gun, I know when it's needed. And it's needed for self-defense against a madman.
Well, murder and killing is ultimately a violation of basic spiritual principles of the universe. But in this kind of situation, what you're looking at is sending those stingers and the javelin missiles participates in decreasing the killing of innocent civilians and children.
Right.
So the net effect of that action is to diminish murder and suffering. And that's ultimately what we all need to be focused on, is helping our fellow beings and bringing peace and love to this world. But that sometimes requires that you have to send in the stingers and the javelins, because otherwise those forces of evil, which is exactly what Putin is right now, just completely violate so many kind of spiritual principles. Again, as we've said, ultimately we are to learn from all this and learn never again. That ultimately will be the deep lesson, and getting rid of the nukes completely. That's insane. In fact, I vote for getting rid of all warfare. To me, warfare is a complete ruse that authoritarians, dictators, power mongers, narcissists foist upon the world. And all warfare ultimately is just a horrible kind of sin against humanity. We need to obliterate warfare from human activity.
And it felt like that's where the Western world was headed. And of course, I'm not naive enough to misunderstand. The U.S. has committed its own mistakes abroad and elsewhere. But generally speaking, we were on that pathway. Comments about less war in the world and this and that, withdrawing from other areas, and it's now everything seems to have changed. But hopefully, hopefully this will bring an end to it all, because we realize.
I must say it's very saddening for me, because I know raising my two boys, who are now 34 and 23 years old. I was always happy that we were moving away from my childhood, when we had bomb shelters. I remember
Duck and cover.
my duck and cover, and I found out years later that duck and cover, the school I was in, was half a mile from a Western Electric radar plant that was essential for the Nike missile defense system. We would have had megatons exploding. That desk would not have been very helpful at all. In fact, my mother, I remember when our neighbors built a 7-room bomb shelter, she said, well, if we get to that point, we're going to go out in the yard and watch the fireworks.
And by the time I was born, I'm 10 years later than Eben. We had no such things ever mentioned. So
I was hoping all those days were over.
We thought it was
moving
over.
away from them, but unfortunately, Putin, kind of brooding in his COVID isolation, dreaming back 100 years, all of that. Anyway, I won't go into any detail, but it saddens me greatly that the world has taken this horrible turn for the worse with this war in Ukraine.
It makes me, I've had on some ICBM experts before, and they talked about growing up, and they're like, yeah, my dad always said if war was happening, because he lived like a mile away from, like, I don't know, it was like Beale Air Force Base, where he's like, oh, we're going on the roof and we're getting a nuclear suntan. But what I wanted to say was, everything I can't just talk about playing devil's advocate. I have to actually be devil's advocate for myself. And, I have to kind of, what's the opposing view of everything I'm taking right now? And I think of all the military guys I have interviewed: Dale, the Delta Force guy, Joe Tedai, Green Beret, Don Workman, Marine, Miguel Pereira, Marine, JP Veriano, Air Force, Nick Phelps, Air Force, Dan Libby, Air Force. All these guys I've had on. Joe Kent, who's running for Congress out of Washington State, former Special Forces, former CIA. His wife, also Special Forces, an analyst, was killed by a suicide bomb in January 2019 in Syria. He's raising 2 little kids on his own. And I see that guy who is, if anyone can speak on sacrifice, it's him. And he's saying, not our fight. And I look at that and I go, I can't disregard that. Everything we're saying right now, and I agree with Dr. Eben Alexander, Miss Newell, I agree with everything we've said here. But for my own mental exercise, I have to go, what are all these guys saying? I look at all the other Marines who they're younger than me, and Sebastian, I can't pronounce his last name. I've had him on here. My age, missing an arm. He has a prosthetic arm, and he's the most positive person in the world. And I look at him, and he's saying, like, hey, yeah, no, I get it, but are you sending your kids? And so I look at all these guys who are, you would say traditionally, are, conservative war hawks, and they're all sitting here saying, my heart goes out to them. I'm not going over.
Well, I think we agree with that too,
Sure,
though.
sure.
But we're supplying the weapons.
Yeah. No, but no. My point is, no, I agree with you. My point is I have to be very aware of us in a very comfortable place. And whereas I look at my loss with my brother, these guys have those same tattoos on their shoulders, those same pictures on their walls, and they're looking at this and they're going, oh no, I do feel bad, man. Leave me out of it. And I can't discount them. I have to love everyone, and I have to go, the naivety of me to say they don't understand it. Who am I to say that? And vice versa. I'm sure they're all sitting, if in a world, I'm sure they're all, actually, I know for a fact a lot of my military friends who watch this are going to watch this, and they're going to go, that Tommy, his head's in the clouds. He has no idea the sacrifice that's out there. And I can only imagine one of them would say, like, let's at least try to see where he's coming from. And so, like, I have to do that. I have to go, where are they coming from? And
You know,
it's
I do that, Tommy. I love that you said that because I do that all the time, especially when the political divide has been so extreme. I'm always reading both sides. The fact that
you
there are
have
even
to.
such extreme sides is so
Well,
interesting. But I want to know. I want to know, where did these deep-seated beliefs that seem so strange to me, where do they come from? And I
Yeah.
think it's highly important that we read or expose ourselves to
to a broad
many
spectrum.
different sources, not just for politics, but for medical kind of,
Everything.
treatments, for um, environmental approach, just everything, parenting styles. Read a lot of different opinions
Right.
before you just sort of consider one to be the gospel truth. And this applies to religious beliefs as well. It's important to understand that there's so many ways of looking at the world, and we tend to think that if people don't think like we do, that somehow
Yeah.
they need to change and think like us, but that's not true. So I love that you said that, and I love that you said those military guys do the same thing, at least some of them, that they'll say, well, maybe we should try. I like to say we try on, like we go into you
Try on
always
the
use the
shoes.
analogies, right? So if you're going to try on a new sweater or a new
Yeah.
coat,
How
try
does it
on a new
look?
belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, but pretend that you believe that. Where is that coming from? And I do that all the time. Put myself in that other point of view. And it's not easy, especially with all the polarization going on, but I think it's highly critical. And I've been following propaganda and conspiracy theory for many, many years. And I can tell you, this one is really kind of falling flat. This idea that somehow the Ukrainians are killing their own people. I've heard that before being used as excuses for things, and I've kind of wondered, well, I wonder, gosh, I really wonder. But this time I'm like, no way, absolutely no way, this is not the case. And so it's kind of refreshing to see it a little with a little more clarity this time around, I have to say.
Yeah. I look at again, I look at someone like Joe Kent. And maybe if someone had never heard of him, or I've had the honor of interviewing a couple times, maybe you've never heard of him, you'd see this guy going, "This isn't our war. We can't afford this." And people would be like, "That guy, how can he, how can he wear the flag as as a means to get into office and then go against it?" And then you go and like look at like his reasoning, and he posted a video like yesterday, and it's him with his two kids, and it's like a picture of his late wife, and he's like, I this is why I can't do it. And then you look at it and you go, how is that any less of a position of love than my own? It's very easy to go, oh, they just don't want it. And then you go talk to me, you go, why, how come you don't want to give the people the help? And it's, the guy will pull up his arm, and it's like the initials of his like 5 friends he lost in an IED in Iraq. And you're like,
Yeah. Well, these guys, you have to respect their point of view,
yeah,
just like I respect the point of view of those who are ready to fight, who
yes,
don't
yes,
have children yet,
yes,
right? Who
yeah,
are willing to put their, well, some of them do have
Right.
children that
I've seen that.
we've seen, but
yeah.
yeah, I think that the idea that we all can make our own choice is what's critical here, and that there are enough of us to make the different choices. Those who are going to, take care of their children, and those that are going to go fight. We need both. So
Mm.
more power to them. I
Yeah.
respect it.
Yeah, I've and some of the military guys I've talked to, on the other hand, are like, yeah, no, this is what I'm willing to do. This is what
Yeah.
I'm, and so
Uh-huh.
I'm just like, I just sit back and I'm like, the very least, what I have to do is go, what is everyone's reasoning? It's so easy to imagine that people disagree with you are like twiddling their mustache and they're like, I just want to see people die. And then you talk to them and you're like, oh, wait, this person's trying to come from as much of a point of love as I am. And you're like, but ultimately, I think it does kind of all boil down to, you're like, in a weird way, it's also kind of comforting because you go, 99.9% of people are operating from a point of love. We perceive it differently as they disagree with me. They want a no fly zone. They do want a no fly. And then if you talk to them, and you're like, the upside is everyone actually is doing what they genuinely think is right.
Yeah.
And to
Mhm.
me,
Everybody's
that's
trying their
beautiful.
best
Yep.
Yes, to me,
with
that's
what they
genuinely
have.
beautiful.
So,
And with that, What a beautiful ending. It's 11 on the nose. I'm gonna have several missed calls, but I don't care. That was a wonderful conversation. I don't
Thank you,
regret. I
Tommy.
don't
Well,
regret that at
well,
all.
Tommy, thanks so much for having us on.
Yeah, it's
Thank.
been fun. It's been interesting talking about world events because very often we talk about these concepts in a more kind
Or
of
abstract.
esoteric, detached, abstract way. And now it's how do we apply these comments in a real
Yeah.
world event?
Yeah. It's it's studying the equations and memorizing them, and then you get the practice test, and you're like, oh, this is actually kind of difficult. And it's like
Yeah,
we have these
exactly.
beautiful ideas, and it's like, all right, game time. How do you? And you're like, oh, it's but and I always say this. Karen and Dr. Alexander, I genuinely do love you both. It means the world to talk to you guys. It fills my heart, and I can say from the bottom of my heart, I love you both. Thank you
Oh,
for
thank
coming
you,
on
We
Tommy.
love
here.
you,
We
Tommy,
love you
and you're
Thank
too.
you,
doing some
sir.
real good for this world, getting these views out there. So
Thank you,
thanks for
sir.
all that you do.
And keep it
Thank
up.
you. Yep. I will email this to you when it's up, guys.
All right,
All right,
Links to
Tommy.
thank
the
you.
Thanks
books
a lot.
in the description. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr.
All
Alexander.
right, we'll talk
Bye.
soon.
Yep, very much. God
Thanks.
bless.
Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.